Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our study of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, and today reading the story Attached or Committed To. Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. When I was a medical student, an elderly woman came for consultation about a mass on the side of her jaw. Our hospital was one of the leading hospitals for cancer treatment in the world, and the mass was skillfully identified, classed, and staged, and state-of-the-art therapy was determined, which involved both chemotherapy and the total removal of her lower jaw. One of the staff doctors went to discuss our findings and recommendations with the woman and her family and schedule the surgery. He returned outraged. The old woman had refused surgery and her family had supported her in this decision. He had explained carefully the almost certain fatal outcome of her sort of cancer without surgery, described the surgery in detail, and given her the statistics of post-operative survival. The old woman had thanked him for his concern and said that she would go home now. All his arguments had failed to move her. Finally, he asked her to sign a paper absolving the hospital and staff of all responsibility for the outcome. Calmly, with her family looking on, she had signed. Others had gone to talk with them and with her. Despite enormous pressure from the staff, she left the hospital. She never returned. Her refusal to accept our help left the staff angry for days. Our attitude effectively disenfranchised her with respect to her own life. Yet any of us would have passionately defended her right to vote. Despite her enormous dignity and the obvious love of her family, I remember thinking that they were very strange people. I never found out what lay behind her choice, what had caused her to make her difficult decision with such calm certainty. But 35 years have brought some changes not only to me, but to medicine itself. Recently, after I presented this story to a class of medical students, a second-year student commented that he felt the problem was that the doctors had known this woman's disease, but not the woman herself. Who was she, he asked. She was elderly. Had anyone found out what she had lived by all that time? What was important to her? A fine discussion ensued about the difference between defending a person against death and making a commitment to their life. The students raised some hard questions. How do we serve life? Can we know what is best for people? Or do we only know what is best for the treatment of their diseases? Is it possible to improve someone's physical health and yet diminish their integrity? The class split right down the middle. Some felt much the way that my own classmates had felt. Frustrated, judgmental, and angry. But others thought that the doctors of long ago had diagnosed, but they hadn't understood. They had been rendered impotent, not by the woman's refusal of surgery, but by their own refusal to listen and know who she was. This group of students conceived the task of her doctors not as prolonging her life at all costs, but as enabling her to live her life according to her own values. Depending on who she was, this might include prolonging her life, or it might not. I wonder how these comments might have been received 35 years ago by my classmates and teachers. I suspect not well. Unquestionably, we had missed an opportunity to learn about something far more important than the diagnosis and treatment of cancer, but the capacity to recognize that opportunity lay far in the future. Hi everyone, you might remember the title attached or committed to a previous story that we learned and we studied with from Dr. Remen. That's why this story is called Attached or Committed To. So the first story, you might remember, we actually studied a few months ago. I had to look it up myself. But you might remember that young man who needed the amputation, and he was engaged to the fiancée, and he wanted to choose the leg or whatever body part was being amputated over the fiancé, and she kind of throws the ring onto his body part. I don't know if you remember that, but that was attached or committed number 1. So attached or committed number 2 is a really beautiful story. I think it's interesting. I was looking back at the copyright date of this book, and it's 1996, and that is a long time ago. That is almost 2006, 2016. That's not almost 30 years ago. That's 25 years ago since this book has been published. And I think medicine has changed dramatically, and the conception of how we treat people. So all the more so when Dr. Remen in 1996 is reporting about a story that happened 35 years earlier in 1961. So we could only imagine the differences in the ways that people talked about medicine and treatment then. But clearly it was something different then. It outraged the doctor that this elderly woman would decide not to go through with a surgery that would save her life, but instead succumb to it and pass away in the time that she would pass away. The fact that she declined or refused the treatment, I think, is something that we're perhaps a little bit more accustomed to or comfortable nowadays, but I think still pushes the buttons of folks. How could it be that you're not doing everything you can do to save your life, to prolong your life? And those often brings up the questions that we probably hear on a pretty frequent basis about the quantity or the quality of someone's life. I love the line there when Dr. Remen talks about how her doctors and her colleagues at that time cared about the person's rights. They knew that person in the hospital, they would defend their right to vote, but their right to refuse a surgery, they would get outraged at. And so I thought that was just a really striking way of thinking about someone's rights. And then I'm thinking about what the student said as Dr. Remen reports about this case, years later to her students. One of her students in medical school says that doctors know the disease, but they don't know the person. And so I think that just reminds us again about how we interact with each other within healthcare spaces, but really in general. We don't treat the people by their titles or by their diseases or by what's wrong with them, but we should treat them with who they are as human beings, what matters to them. What do they believe in? What brings them joy? What makes them sad? And that's going to allow us to really feel a strong connection to each other. So my hope for you as we reflect this is to think about the ways that we are attached and committed to each other, or committed to each other, the ways in which we aren't able to truly see the person in front of us and to respect the beliefs and the choices of that person, even if it might be different than our own. So I hope that you have a great day and a great week, and I'll see you soon.